The order to cast a queen out of a palace does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives on a single sheet of vellum, folded once, sealed with the king's private ring, and carried across the West Court at a walk by a man who is trying very hard not to run. I know this because I was the man who received it, and I have never in my life read 4 lines so slowly, as if reading them slowly might change what they asked of me. My name is Edrin Vale. For 19 years I stood the Gatehouse Watch at the Palace of Harrogate, and for the last 6 of those years I was sergeant of it, which meant that the great iron gates of the king's house opened and closed on my word, and that no one crossed the threshold. No one, not a scullery boy, not a duke, not the consort of the king himself, without passing under my eyes. It is not a glamorous post. The gate is cold in winter and blinding in summer, and the tourists photograph you as though you are a statue that has learned to breathe. But it is the post I wanted, because the gate is where the palace decides who it is. Everything the household pretends to be inside its warm rooms is tested at the gate, where the pretending stops and a man in a red tunic simply says, "Yes, you may pass," or "No, you may not." On the morning I am telling you about, a cold, clear morning at the tail of autumn, the vellum in my glove said that I would say no to the second most powerful person in the kingdom, and that I would say it to her face, at my gate, in front of anyone who cared to watch. Let me go back a little, so you understand what the sheet of vellum was answering. You cannot understand the casting out unless you understand the long, slow theft it ended. King Alaric of Eldermore had been a widower before he was a bridegroom the second time. His first wife, Queen Isolde, had died when the crown Prince Rowan was still a boy, and the whole realm had grieved her, because she had been the rare kind of royal the ordinary people actually loved, plain-spoken, unafraid of mud, given to appearing at the wrong hospital ward at the wrong hour with no photographers arranged. When she died, she left behind a son, a grieving king, and a collection of jewels that had come down through her own line, not the crowns, the Isolde jewels. They were called, though she had hated the name and called them my mother's box. A river of old stones, the pale sapphire the size of a thrush's egg, the collar of gray pearls, the ring the color of a winter sky, and the piece the whole kingdom knew from the coronation portraits, the Isolde diadem, a band of white gold set with 7 diamonds cut in a fashion no living jeweler could copy. By her written will, witnessed and sealed, those jewels were held in trust, not for a wife, not for the crown, but for her line, for Rowan, and after him for Rowan's children, and never, under any circumstance she could imagine, to be broken up, gifted, or sold, except by the express and recorded decision of the reigning monarch acting for the good of the whole realm. 9 years after Isolde was laid in the royal vault, King Alaric married again. He married the Lady Morwenna, and Morwenna became Queen Consort. I will try to be fair to her, because a man in my old post learns that fairness is a kind of discipline too, and because the easy version of this story, the wicked stepmother, the cackle, the poisoned apple, is a child's story, and this was not a child's story. Morwenna was clever, and she was charming when charm served her, and she loved beautiful things the way some people love other people, wholly and without limit. She had come to the marriage from a house with a great name and small coffers, and I think the smallness of the coffers had left a hunger in her that the great name could never fill. She looked at the Isolde jewels the way a starving woman looks at bread behind glass. And she had a son of her own, Lord Cassius, from before her marriage to the king, a young man with his mother's cleverness and none of her patience, who wore the palace like a coat he had bought on credit and expected everyone to admire. For years the theft was not a theft. It was requests, a brooch borrowed for a state dinner and slow to come back to the vault, a pair of the gray pearls worn to a christening, and then, somehow, listed the next season in the household inventory under Morwenna's own name in a clerk's hand no one would admit to. It was the way water takes a field, not all at once, but a finger's width at a time, so that no single morning is the morning the field is lost, And then one day you look and the field is a lake. By the autumn I am telling you of, more than half of Queen Isolde's box had migrated, on paper and in fact, out of the trust that was meant to hold it for her son and grandchildren, and into the private keeping of a woman who had never met her. The Crown Prince Rowan was not a boy any longer. He had grown into a serious, careful man, slow to anger and slower to speak, and he had watched his mother's jewels leave the vault one piece at a time with a patience that his enemies mistook for weakness. It was not weakness. It was a man building a case. Rowan did not want a scene. He wanted the law. He wanted every stone accounted for, every clerk's forgery documented, every gift traced back to the moment it stopped being a loan and became a lie, so that when he finally moved, he would move once completely, and it would hold. My part in all of it for a long time was small. I was the gate. I saw the boxes go out and I saw them not come back. I saw Lord Cassius's driver load a long flat case into a car at dawn more than once, and I logged it. Because logging what passes the gate is the whole of a gatekeeper's craft. And I did not know then that my dull little ledgers of who passed with what would one day be the spine of a crown prince's case. I only knew that something was leaving the king's house that ought not to leave it, and that no one had asked me to stop it, and that a guard who stops what he has not been ordered to stop is a guard who has appointed himself king. So I logged, and I watched, and I waited, and the waiting cost me more than I will pretty up for you here. There were nights I lay awake certain I was watching a robbery and doing nothing, and I had to teach myself, over and over, the hardest lesson of the post, that the discipline to not act on a wrong you have no lawful power to right is heavier than any action, and that a man who cannot carry it has no business at a gate. The morning the vellum came, the waiting ended. I had come on watch 2 hours before dawn, as I always did, to receive the night's log from the man I relieved, and to walk the perimeter while the palace still slept. It was one of those mornings when the cold has a taste to it, iron and wood smoke, and the great forecourt lay empty and silver under a sky just going gray. My name is not important to the world, but I will tell you that I loved that hour. The palace hushed and honest before the day's performance began, and I loved my post, and I did not know that morning that it was the last quiet hour I would have for a long time. The runner found me at the north pillar. He was a young equerry named Tomas, and he was out of breath, and his hand shook when he held out the folded vellum, and I understood before I broke the seal that whatever was inside it was not ordinary, because ordinary orders do not make grown men's hands shake. I broke the king's private seal, the small ring, not the great one, which meant this was Alaric speaking as a man and a husband and a father, not as the machinery of state, and I read. The order was 4 lines. I will not pretend I remember them word for word after all these years, but I remember their shape, which was this, that on this day the Queen Consort Morwenna and Lord Cassius were no longer to be admitted to or resident within any royal house, that they were to be permitted to remove their own personal property and nothing else, that any property of the crown or of the trust of the late Queen Isolde found upon them or their effects was to be recovered by the watch and held, and that this order was to be executed by the sergeant of the Gatehouse Watch, by me, with the full authority of the king, and with dignity and without cruelty, and without exception. I read it 4 times. Tomas watched me read it 4 times and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. When I looked up, the gray sky had gone a shade paler, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that it was going to be a fine day, a clear, cold, beautiful day, and that I would remember for the rest of my life that the day they cast out a queen was a fine one. Does she know? I asked him. The crown prince is with the king now, Tomas said. Princess Adela is with them. They will tell her within the hour. His Highness said, the boy swallowed. His Highness said the gate is to hold, whatever she says, whoever she brings. The gate is to hold until it is done. The gate is to hold. 3 words, and they settled over me like a mantle, because they were the whole of my craft distilled to its bone. Anyone can open a gate. It takes no courage and no character to swing iron on a hinge and let the powerful through, because the powerful expect it and the world is arranged to grease their passage. The whole test of a gatekeeper, the only test that has ever mattered, comes on the day the gate is ordered to hold against someone who has never in her life been told no, and who will not believe, until the iron does not move, that the word applies to her. I folded the vellum and put it inside my tunic, against my chest, where I could feel its edge. I told Tomas to go back and to tell the crown prince that the gate understood, and that the gate would hold, and to tell him nothing else, because the fewer men who carried these words this morning, the cleaner the morning would be. Then I did what I had done every morning for 6 years and had never once done, with a folded order of banishment against my ribs. I called my watch to me. I had 8 men on the day gate, good men, steady men, and I told them in as few words as I could what the day was going to ask of us. I did not soften it. I have led men long enough to know that softening a hard order is not kindness. It is a lie that comes due at the worst moment. I told them plainly, the king has ordered the Queen Consort and Lord Cassius out of the royal houses. The watch executes it at this gate. They may remove their own things and nothing more. Anything of the crowns, anything of the late Queen Isolde's, we recover and hold. There will be shouting. There may be worse than shouting. No man raises a hand except to prevent harm. No man raises his voice at all. And no man, I said this twice, no man lets the gate open on any word but mine. I watched their faces while I spoke. You learn to read faces at a gate, and I was reading for the one thing that would have made the day impossible. A man who was excited. A man who wanted this, who relished the coming spectacle of the mighty brought low. That man is a danger because he will overreach, he will editorialize with his eyes, he will make of a lawful hard duty a private cruelty, and he will hand the powerful exactly the grievance they need. But I saw no excitement. I saw 8 men go pale and grave, the way honest men do when they understand that a heavy thing has been laid on them, and that carrying it well is the only decent thing left to do. Corporal Hale, my second, an old soldier with a face like a closed door, simply nodded once and said, "The gate holds, Sergeant." And that was all the argument there was. We had, I judged, less than an hour before the household knew. I used it. I sent for the vault keeper, an anxious, careful man named Perrin, and I asked him one question. Of the Isolde jewels, what did the trust's record say was missing from the vault as of this morning? He went the color of the vellum in my tunic. He came back a quarter-hour later with a ledger and a list, and the list was long. 7 of the great pieces were gone from the vault and unaccounted for, including, at the very top, in Perrin's small frightened hand, the Isolde diadem itself. I looked at that list a long time. Then I understood the true shape of the morning, and it was worse and simpler than I had thought. The king had not merely ordered 2 people out of a house. He had ordered them out with nothing but their own, and the greatest treasures of the late queen's line were, this very morning, not in the vault where they belonged, but somewhere out there, in a dressing room, in a case, in the boot of a car, on a body moving even now toward a gate. My gate. And it was my task to see that, when Morwenna and Cassius crossed my threshold for the last time, those 7 pieces did not cross it with them. I put Perrin's list beside the king's order, inside my tunic, over my heart, and I went to stand at the gate, and I waited for the palace to wake and learn what kind of day it was going to be. The palace woke the way a great house wakes, unevenly, the low floors first. Kitchen chimneys smoked. A laundry cart crossed the stones. The day's first tourists began to gather beyond the outer rail, cameras up, faces expectant, entirely ignorant of the fact that they had arrived on the most extraordinary morning in the palace's recent history. I posted 2 men to the outer rail with the quiet instruction to keep the public back and to say nothing, and I kept the rest close. The first ripple reached me not as news but as behavior. A footman I had never seen hurry cross the west court at a run. A window on the 2nd floor, the Queen Consort's floor, flew open and then slammed. Two of Morwenna's ladies came down the state stair and stood in the arcade with their heads together, glancing at the gate and then away, glancing and away, the way people do when they are discussing you and know you can see them. I stood still. Stillness is a language, and the fluent understand it. My stillness said the gate already knows, and there is nothing you can carry to it that will change its shape. Then the shape of it changed anyway, because Lord Cassius came out first. He came out of the south door alone, without a coat, his hair not yet ordered, and he came fast across the stones with the particular energy of a man who has just been told a thing he refuses to believe and intends to unbelieve by force of will. He was young, not much past 25, and handsome in the way that photographs well and wears badly, and he had the habit, common to men raised near power without ever earning it, of walking directly at people as though they would dissolve. He walked directly at me. "Sergeant," he was breathing hard. "There has been a misunderstanding. My mother and I are leaving this morning, a short visit to our country house, a family matter, nothing more. My staff will bring our things down. See that the cars are admitted to the inner court." It was a good try. I will give him that. If I had not had the king's order against my chest, and if I had not spent 19 years learning to hear the tremor under a smooth voice, I might have believed I was being asked a small logistical favor by a man with the right to ask it. But I had the order, and I heard the tremor, and I understood that he was not lying to me, he was rehearsing. He was trying out the story he meant to tell the world, testing it on the first official face he met, and if I nodded and admitted the cars, the story would be true. Not a banishment, only a visit, only a family matter, the Queen Consort departing at her own convenience. The gate, you see, is where the story of the day gets decided, and Cassius had come to the gate to write it. "My lord," I said, "the cars will not enter the inner court. Your things and her grace's things will be brought to the gate and examined and passed to you here. That is the whole of what will happen this morning." His face did an interesting thing. For half a second the smoothness slipped and I saw under it, and under it was not surprise. That was the thing that told me most. He was not surprised. He had known this was possible. He had perhaps known it was coming. The rehearsal was not the rehearsal of an innocent man caught out. It was the rehearsal of a guilty one who had hoped to be gone before the gate closed. "Examined," he repeated very quietly. "You mean to search us?" "I mean to see that nothing leaves this house that is not yours to take, my lord. Your own property you may remove freely. That is the king's own instruction, and his instruction is also that you be treated with dignity, which you will be." "The king," said Cassius, and now the smoothness was entirely gone and something colder stood in its place, "does not know what he has signed. My mother will explain it to him. You will regret standing in this gate when she does." "Perhaps," I said, "but I will regret opening it more. Good morning, my lord." He stood a moment longer, looking at me, doing sums behind his eyes, and I let him. "I have learned that you do not need to win the argument at the gate. You need only to be the wall the argument breaks on, and to still be standing when it has broken." He turned and went back across the stones faster than he had come, and I knew he was going to fetch the only artillery he had, and that within the half-hour I would be looking not at the sun but at the mother, and that the true morning would begin. I used the half-hour. I had the men rig a plain trestle table just inside the gate in the open, in full view of the arcade and the state windows, and beyond the outer rail the growing crowd. This was deliberate. A search done in a closed room is a search that can be lied about afterward. She took nothing. They planted it. The guards are thieves themselves. A search done in the open, before 100 witnesses and their cameras, is a search that writes its own honest record. If we were going to recover a queen's stolen jewels this morning, I wanted the recovery to happen where God and the tourists could both see it, so that no one ever could tell the story of the day as anything but what it was. Perrin the vault keeper I placed at the table with his ledger and a jeweler's glass, because it was not enough to find a stone. We had to be able to say, on the spot, with authority, this stone is crown, this stone is trust, this stone is hers. I placed Corporal Hale at my right hand. I placed 2 men at each leaf of the gate. And I placed myself in the center of the threshold, where I had stood for 6 years, on the exact line where the king's house ended and the world began, and I waited. She came at the head of a procession. That was clever too, and I admired it even as I braced against it. Morwenna did not come alone and frightened like her son. She came in state, as a queen, deliberately, to make the casting out look like a departure and the departure look like a triumph. She wore gray and silver and a hard, bright smile, and she came down the state stair and across the west court with her ladies behind her and her son at her side, and 2 liveried men carrying a long case between them. And she came at a queen's pace, unhurried, as though the gate would of course open, because in her whole life every gate always had. Behind her, at a distance, walking neither with her party nor against it, came 2 others I had not expected and was profoundly glad to see. The Crown Prince Rowan, grave and silent in dark clothes, and beside him a tall straight-backed woman of 60 in riding boots and no ceremony at all, the Princess Adela, the king's own sister, who had buried 2 husbands and 40 years of court intrigue and feared, so far as anyone at Harrogate had ever discovered, absolutely nothing. They did not come to help me hold the gate. They came, I understood, to witness, to be the crown's own eyes on the threshold, so that the deed would be done not in a corner, but under the direct gaze of the king's heir and the king's sister. It was the highest compliment the household could have paid my gate, and it also raised the stakes of the morning to a height that made my mouth go dry. Morwenna stopped 6 feet from me. Her ladies stopped behind her. The liveried men set down the long case with care. The crowd beyond the rail had gone quiet, sensing, the way crowds do, that they had stumbled into something. And the Queen Consort of Eldermore looked at me with her hard, bright smile and spoke in a voice pitched to carry. "Sergeant Vale," she said, "open the gate. I am leaving, and I do not care to be kept waiting in my own courtyard." There it was, your own courtyard. The whole claim in 3 words: that the house was hers, that the leaving was her choice, that I was a servant delaying his mistress. And 100 people were listening to hear whether the man in the red tunic would agree. "Your Grace," I said, and I pitched my voice to carry too, because this was the one moment of the morning that had to be heard clearly by everyone, by the order of the king, sealed this morning with his own ring. "You and Lord Cassius are to be admitted to no royal house from this day. You may take with you your own property, freely and with dignity. Anything that is the property of the crown or of the trust of the late Queen Isolde will be recovered and held. Your own things will be passed to you at this table. That is the king's order, and I will execute it exactly, no more and no less. I have stood in cold and heat and been shouted at by men twice my rank, but I do not think I have ever felt a silence like the one that followed. She had not expected me to say it aloud. She had expected a murmured, apologetic, bureaucratic obstruction that she could sweep aside with volume and rank. Instead, I had said the whole naked truth of the morning to 100 witnesses in a voice they could all hear, and now it was said, and it could not be unsaid, and everyone standing in that courtyard knew exactly what they were watching. The smile did not leave her face. That, I think, was the most frightening thing about her. The smile stayed while her eyes went to war. "You are a gatekeeper," she said, softly now for me and not the crowd. "You unlatch a gate. That is your whole worth to this house, and you presume to tell a queen what she may carry out of it." "I presume nothing, your grace," I said. "The king presumes. I only hold the gate." She looked past me then, deliberately, dismissively, to the 2 who stood at the edge of the court. "Rowan," she called, pitching it warm, aggrieved, a mother wronged. "Rowan, dear, this is beneath your father. You know it is. Whatever poison someone has poured in his ear this morning, this, a common search at a gate in front of a mob, this is not how a king treats the woman he married. Speak to this man." The crown prince did not move for a moment. Then he came forward, not far, only a few steps, enough to be clearly seen and clearly heard, and no farther because he understood, as I understood, that the gate was mine to hold, and that a prince who fights a queen's battle at a gate has already lowered the gate to a family quarrel. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and terribly level, the voice of a man who has waited years to say a thing and has decided to say it without heat. "The order is my father's," Rowan said. "It is lawful, it was witnessed, and it is not poison, Morwenna. It is a ledger." He let that land. "Sergeant Vale will do exactly what he has said, no more and no less, and my aunt and I will stand here until it is done, so that no one may ever say it was done in the dark. You may make this morning short and dignified, or you may make it long and loud. Either way it ends the same. I would choose short for your own sake." For the first time the smile flickered. Not fell, flickered, like a candle when a door opens somewhere in the house. She had counted, I think, on Rowan's mildness. She had spent years reading his patience as timidity, and now here he stood, mild and immovable, and she understood at last that the patience had never been timidity but had been this, a man building, stone by stone, the exact wall she was now standing against. She turned back to me, and the warmth was entirely gone. "Search then," she said. "Search and find nothing, and be dismissed from your post before nightfall. My things." She snapped her fingers, and the liveried men brought the long case to the trestle table and opened it. I want to tell this part carefully because the search is where the morning was won, and because a search is the easiest thing in the world to do badly. A search done in anger, or in triumph, or in a hurry, is a search that becomes the story instead of settling it. So I did not touch anything. I stood at the head of the table, and I let Perrin work slowly, aloud, with his glass and his ledger. And I let the Crown Prince and the Princess Adela watch every motion of his hands, and I let the crowd watch too, and I made of the search a thing so patient, and so open that no honest witness could ever call it anything but just. The first case held clothes. Folded gowns, furs, shoes in cloth bags. Her own, unquestionably, and we passed each item across the table to her ladies without comment, and I saw the crowd relax a little, disappointed almost, as though they had expected us to seize a queen's dresses, and were reassured to find that we would not. That reassurance was worth more than gold to me. It told the watching hundred that the gate was fair, that we took only what was not hers, and it meant that when the gate did take something, the taking would be believed. The second case held smaller things. A jewelry roll of soft gray suede, and Perrin opened it on the table with great care, and here the morning slowed and sharpened to a point. Inside were perhaps a dozen pieces. Perrin went through them one at a time, holding each to his glass, checking it against the ledger and speaking his findings in a flat, clear voice that carried. Personal, a garnet, her own, hers before the marriage, no claim. He set it aside on the near side of the table, the side that meant hers. Personal, pearl drops purchased in the second year, household account but a documented gift, hers, near side. Personal, and so on. And with each one the near side pile grew, and I watched Morwenna's smile come creeping back, because she thought she saw where this was going, that we would paw through her jewels and find them all her own and be humiliated for it. Then Perrin lifted a ring and stopped, and did not speak. It was a ring the color of a winter sky, a pale sapphire, old cut, in a setting of white gold worn thin with age. I had seen it before. Everyone of a certain age in that courtyard had seen it before, in a photograph that had hung in every schoolroom in the kingdom for a decade, on the hand of Queen Isolde, in her coronation portrait, resting on the arm of a chair. Perrin turned it to his glass with a hand that had begun, very slightly, to shake. Then he set down the glass and looked up at me, and he did not put the ring on the near side of the table. "Sergeant," he said, and his voice had gone thin, "this is the winter sky sapphire, Isolde Trust Catalog Piece 4. It was recorded missing from the vault." He swallowed. "It is on the trust list. It is not her grace's to remove." The courtyard did not gasp. It did something quieter and far more dangerous to Morwenna than a gasp. It understood. 100 people, and the crown prince, and the king's sister, all in the same instant understood that the Queen Consort of Eldermore had just been found packing the dead first queen's jewels into her luggage as she left, and that it had happened not in a locked room but here, in the open, at the gate, under the glass, where it could never be denied. Morwenna's smile did not merely flicker now, it broke. "That is mine," she said, too fast, too loud. "The king gave it to me. It was a gift, years ago, everyone knows." "The trust record shows no gift," said Perrin, and I heard the tremor in his voice steady itself into something almost brave, because a frightened, careful man had just discovered that the ledger he had kept faithfully for years was, this morning, a kind of sword, and that he was permitted to raise it. Catalogue Piece 4. Held in trust for the line of Queen Isolde. Any gift out of the trust must be recorded and sealed by the reigning monarch. There is no such record. I keep the record. There is none. "Then the record is wrong," Morwenna snapped. "Or it was destroyed, or this man," she flung a hand at Perrin, "has been paid to lie. Rowan, you cannot. You cannot let a clerk and a gatekeeper strip me at a gate on the word of a book." "The book is the trust, Morwenna," said the Princess Adela. It was the first thing the old woman had said all morning, and she said it without raising her voice, and the courtyard went so still I could hear the flags snapping on the palace roof. Princess Adela had a voice like a dry stone wall, plain, weathered, and utterly without give, and when she spoke, the whole court leaned in, because everyone at Harrogate knew that Adela did not waste words and did not ever take a side she could not hold. "I witnessed Isolde's will," Adela went on. "I stood in the room when she signed it. I know what is in that trust and what is not, because I have read the catalogue more times than you have worn its stones, madam. Piece 4 is the winter sky sapphire. Piece 1 is the pale sapphire. Piece 7 is the diadem." She let each number fall like a coin on stone. "That ring is not yours. It was never yours. And I should very much like, before this morning ends, to know where the other 6 pieces are." That was the question that changed the shape of the day. Until Adela spoke it, the morning had been about a departure and a search, a queen leaving, her things examined, a ring found where it should not be. A single ring can be explained away for years. Grand houses have swallowed 100 such rings. But Adela had said 6, aloud, before 100 witnesses, and now the whole courtyard was doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic said that one found ring meant 6 more somewhere, and that somewhere was standing in this courtyard on this morning, packed in cases that had not yet all been opened. I saw Morwenna's eyes move. It was the smallest thing, a flick, quick, involuntary, the way a person's eyes betray the thing they are trying not to look at, and her eyes moved to her son. I have spent my life reading the small tales of people who believe they are giving nothing away, and I read that one the way you read a signpost. Whatever else was in the cases on this table, the great pieces, the ones worth a duchy each, were not with the mother. They were with the son. She had kept the ring, a sentimental foolishness, the one piece too beautiful to part with even for a morning. But the diadem, the collar of gray pearls, the pale sapphire the size of a thrush's egg, those she had given to Cassius to carry, because Cassius was the one who was clever with cars and dawn departures, and because a mother's cases would be searched but a young lord's she had gambled might be waved through. "Lord Cassius," I said, "your cases on the table." And Cassius, who had been very still and very quiet through the unpacking of his mother's things, made the mistake that decided everything. He said, "I have no cases. I travel light." And as he said it, he shifted his weight half a step, putting himself between the table and the 2 liveried men who had carried the long case. And behind those men, at the foot of the state stair, stood a porter's trolley I had not marked before, stacked with 3 flat black cases, and a manservant beside it who had gone the color of ash. "You have 3, I said. "On the trolley, bring them." "Those are documents," Cassius said. "Private papers. You have no authority over a man's private papers, gatekeeper, king's order or no." "Then they will open," I said, and be found to be papers and be closed again and pass, and I will beg your pardon before all these people. That is a small price for me to pay, my lord. Bring them." He did not bring them. He looked for one wild instant, as though he might snatch the trolley and run it at the gate, and my men saw it too and shifted their weight, and I said quietly, not to him but to my own, "Hold! No hands!" Because the last thing the morning needed was a scuffle over a trolley that would let them cry ever after that the guards had assaulted a lord and planted what they found. I would not give them that. I would make him open the cases himself, or I would make him refuse to open them himself, in front of everyone, and either way the truth would be his own doing and not mine. "My lord," I said, and I stepped to the side, clearing his path to the table, so that everyone could see there was nothing between him and it but his own will. "No one will touch your cases but you. Bring them to this table and open them with your own hands, and if they hold papers you will walk out of this gate a wronged man and I the fool. But if you will not open them, if you would rather leave 3 sealed cases here at this gate than let them be seen, then every soul in this courtyard will draw the only conclusion there is to draw, and you will have drawn it for them. The choice is entirely yours. I will wait." And I waited. It is a strange power, waiting. Men who cannot be beaten in argument can be beaten by silence, because silence hands them the whole burden of the next word, and a guilty man's next word is almost always a rope. I stood at the gate and said nothing more, and the crowd said nothing, and the crown prince said nothing, and the Princess Adela watched Cassius with her dry stone eyes, and the 3 black cases sat on the trolley in the pale autumn sun, and every second that passed without them being opened was a second in which the whole kingdom, present and to come, understood a little more completely what was inside them. Cassius broke, not toward the table, away from it. He turned to his mother and said, low and vicious, "This is your doing. If you had left the ring in the vault like I told you," and stopped, because he heard himself, because in his fright he had just said, aloud before 100 witnesses and a crown prince and the king's sister, the sentence that convicted them both. "If you had left the ring in the vault, not this is a mistake, not these are ours, if you had left it in the vault." He had confessed the whole architecture of it in 9 furious words, and the courtyard heard every one. Morwenna closed her eyes. I have thought often since about that moment. The moment a scheme that had taken years to build, that had moved a queen's jewels fingers width by fingers width out of a trust and into a lie, came apart not on the strength of my case or the crown prince's ledger, but on a son's temper at a gate. All the patient forgeries in the household ledgers, all the borrowed brooches slow to return, all the clerk's careful hand entering loans as gifts, all of it undone because a frightened young man could not, for 90 seconds, hold his tongue. There is a lesson in it about the difference between the cleverness that builds a wrong and the character that would have been needed to carry it off, and Cassius had a great deal of the first and none at all of the second. "Open the cases, my lord," I said, gently now. "There is no need to be hard with a man who has just destroyed himself. Hardness only lets him pretend he was defeated by cruelty instead of by the truth. Open them, and let us all see, and let this morning be over." He opened them. I will not dress up what was inside. He knelt on the cold stones by the trolley and worked the latches of the first case with hands that had stopped obeying him well, and he threw back the lid, and there, nested in fitted gray velvet, catching the flat autumn light and throwing it back in 100 cold sparks, lay the collar of gray pearls and the pale sapphire the size of a thrush's egg, and beneath them in the second case, wrapped in a fold of black silk as though someone had tried at the last to hide it even from itself, lay the Isolde diadem. 7 diamonds, cut in a fashion no living jeweler could copy, in a band of white gold that had rested on the brow of a queen the whole realm had loved. It had not sat in daylight in 9 years. It sat in daylight now, on a porter's trolley at a gate, in the hands of a shaking young man who had meant to carry it out of the kingdom before breakfast, and the courtyard looked at it, and no one made a sound. Perrin came round the table and knelt beside Cassius, not roughly, almost tenderly, the careful, reverent movement of a man who had catalogued these stones and mourned them missing and could not quite believe he was seeing them again. And he lifted the diadem in both hands and held it to his glass. Though he did not need the glass, everyone knew what it was, and he said in a voice that cracked clean across, "Catalog piece 7, the Isolde diadem. Recovered." And then, because he was that kind of man, he said it again to the ledger quietly, as though the book itself had been grieving and deserved to be told. Recovered. I thought for one foolish moment that it was over. It was not over. The great pieces were on the table, and the trust was proven, and the son had confessed with his own mouth. But Morwenna had not spent her whole life at courts to be undone by an inventory. She was a fighter, and a cornered fighter is at her most dangerous. And now she opened the only campaign she had left, not to keep the jewels, which were plainly lost to her, but to poison the morning so thoroughly that no one afterward could be sure of what they had seen. If she could not walk out a queen, she would make certain that the men who cast her out walked into a scandal of their own. She turned to the crowd, not to me, not to Rowan, to the crowd, and to the phones held up above it, and her voice, when it came, had been remade. Gone was the hard, bright brittleness. In its place was something soft and shaking and wounded, a mother, a widow's rival, a woman alone against armed men at a gate. She was very, very good. "Look at them," she said, and her voice trembled beautifully. "Look at what they do. A woman put out of her own home at dawn, her son threatened, her things torn open on a table in the street for a mob to gape at. These jewels," she gestured at the diadem, and her hand shook, and I could not even then tell how much of the shaking was art. "These were given to me, by my husband, in love. And now that he is old and ill and easily led, the people who want me gone have poured lies in his ear and sent soldiers to strip me at the gate like a thief. Is this justice? Is this what this kingdom has become? A woman robbed in public by men in red coats and told to smile." It was a masterpiece of its kind, and I felt it land. I felt the crowd's certainty waver. I could see it in the phones, the way they steadied on her face, the way the courtyard's silence changed temperature. Because there is always a part of a crowd that will side with the one who weeps, regardless of the ledger, and Morwenna knew it, and she wept exactly enough. The story of the day, which I had fought all morning to keep honest, was being wrestled from me at the last, and it was being wrestled toward a lie so useful that it might survive every fact. Not a queen who stole, but a queen who was robbed. I will confess to you that in that moment I did not know what to do. My orders covered the gate and the search and the recovery. They did not cover a weeping woman remaking herself into a victim before 100 cameras. If I answered her, I became a man arguing with a crying woman, and I would lose, because a man in a red coat arguing with a crying woman has already lost whatever anyone films. If I did not answer her, her version stood. I stood in the threshold I had held all morning and felt, for the first time that day, the ground move under me. It was Princess Adela who did not move. She had watched the performance with the flat patience of a woman who had seen 40 years of them, and when Morwenna's voice broke on told to smile, the old princess stepped forward past me, which she had every right to do and I had no right to prevent, into the very center of the threshold. And she did not weep, and she did not soften, and she did not play to the phones at all. She looked at the crowd as though the crowd were a slightly slow regiment, and she spoke to them plainly. "She is a fine actress," Adela said. "I will give her that. But you are not children, so I will not let her treat you as ones." She turned and pointed, one weathered finger at the diadem on the table. "That is not a gift. There is no record of a gift, because there was no gift, because the trust that holds it cannot be given away except by the king's sealed order, and no such order exists, because the king never gave it. I know he never gave it because I asked him this morning before I came down these stairs. I said, 'Alaric, did you give her Isolde's diadem?' And my brother wept, an old man, yes, and ill, yes, but not so ill that he does not know his own dead wife's crown, and he said, 'No, Adela, I never gave her anything of Isolde's. I could not. It was not mine to give. She let the courtyard hold that. She did not receive these jewels. She removed them. There is a difference, and every one of you knows it, and no amount of pretty weeping will make it not so. And then Adela did the thing I have never forgotten, the thing that turned the whole morning back to true. She reached down and she picked up, from the near side of the table, the winter sky sapphire ring, the one Perrin had found first, and she held it up between two fingers so the crowd could see it. "This ring," she said, "I remember on Isolde's hand. She wore it to my wedding. She was kind to me when I was frightened and young, and she wore this ring, and I have not seen it in 9 years, and I have missed it because I loved her." Her dry voice did not break, but it thinned, and the thinning was worth more than all Morwenna's tears because it was true and the crowd could hear that it was true. It is not a bauble in a dispute. It is a dead woman's ring kept for her son, and it was in that woman's luggage this morning, packed to leave. You have seen it with your own eyes. Believe your eyes. Not her voice, your eyes. The temperature of the courtyard changed back. I felt it go, the wavering, felt the crowd's certainty settle again onto the ledger and the diadem, and the plain old truthful woman holding up a ring she had loved. Morwenna felt it too. Her weeping stopped as though a tap had been turned, which told me, and told everyone who was watching closely, exactly how much of it had ever been real. She had one card left, and she played it at me because I was the nearest wall. "You will lose everything for this," she said, low, private, meant only for me, though I have no doubt she hoped a phone might catch it. "I will not be gone a week before I am back, and when I am back I will remember the gatekeeper who searched me in the street, your post, your pension, your good name. There will be a version of this morning, Sergeant, in which you are the thief and I am the wronged queen, and I have the friends and the patience to make it the version people remember. You have held your little gate very bravely. It will cost you your life's whole work. Was it worth it for a book of stones? I have been threatened by better than Morwenna, and by worse, and I had long ago made my peace with the fact that a gate held honestly will now, and then cost the man who holds it. But I will not pretend her words did not find the soft place they were aimed at, because they were shrewdly aimed. My post was my life. I had no other. And she was right that the powerful have long memories and longer reach, and that a version of the truth backed by friends and patience can indeed outrun the truth for years. I looked at her, and I looked at the diadem on the table, and I thought of the nights I had lain awake watching a robbery I had no power to stop, and I gave her the only answer I had. "Your Grace," I said, "I have stood this gate for 6 years, and every one of those years you carried something of the late Queen's out of it, and I could do nothing but write it in a book. This morning the King gave me leave to close the book and hold the gate, and I have. If it costs me the post, then the post cost me something worth paying for at the last. That is a fair trade. And as for the version people remember," I nodded toward the 100 phones, still raised, still recording. "You chose to do this in the open, Your Grace. So did I. The version people remember is the one they are filming. I am content to be judged by it." She had nothing to say to that, and it is a rare thing to leave Morwenna with nothing to say. She drew herself up and gathered the tatters of the Queen back around her, and I will give her this last honesty. She did it well. Whatever she was not a coward. She turned her back on me and gathered her ladies and prepared to leave the way she had planned to leave all along, on her own feet, at her own pace, refusing to the last to be seen dragged. But we were not finished, and this is where the morning nearly went wrong at the very end, in the way that mornings do, not in the great confrontation but in the small overlooked thing that everyone has stopped watching. Perrin was counting. He was a careful man, and careful men count, and while the courtyard's attention had been fixed on Adela and the ring and Morwenna's tears, Perrin had quietly laid out on the table every recovered piece and checked it against his list, and now he tugged at my sleeve, and his frightened, careful face had gone frightened again. "Sergeant," he said under his breath, 6, I have 6. The ring, the collar, the 2 sapphires, the diadem, the gray drops, 6 of the 7. The pale blue brooch, catalog piece 3, the star brooch, it is not here. 6 of 7. The morning had recovered a fortune, and I had let myself believe it was whole, and it was not whole, and the missing piece was the small one, the easy one to slip into a pocket, the one no one would think to look for once the diadem was found. And the two people who had carried the jewels to my gate were, even now, 3 steps from walking out of it forever. I did not raise my voice. I have learned that the loud alarm is the enemy's friend. It warns them, and it turns a recovery into a scramble. I stepped once quietly to put myself back in the center of the threshold, and I said, in the same level voice I had used all morning, "Your Grace, one more piece is missing from the trust. The star brooch, Catalog 3. It has not been found in the cases. Before you pass this gate, it will be found." Morwenna turned, and her face was a study. "You have searched us," she said. "You have humiliated us. You have my son's cases open on the stones. There is nothing more. Let me pass." "There is one more piece," I said, "and it is small, and it is not in the cases, and so it is on a person. I will not touch you, Your Grace, nor any of your ladies. I have not touched anyone this morning, and I will not begin. But the king's order is that nothing of the trust leaves this gate, and a brooch the size of a coin is nothing to a woman who means to keep it, and everything to the granddaughter of the queen it belongs to. So I will ask you plainly, before all these witnesses, to produce it. And if you will not," I paused, "then we will stand here. All of us, as long as it takes. The gate has nowhere to be." It was the same weapon I had used on the son, and it worked on the mother for the same reason. Because a person who will not be searched and will not confess is left with only the option of standing forever in front of 100 cameras, refusing to move, which is itself a confession that grows louder every minute. And Morwenna was too clever not to see it. She saw that she had lost the brooch the moment it was noticed missing, and that the only thing she still controlled was whether she surrendered it with a shred of grace or clutched it, until it was pried from a spectacle of her own making. For a long moment, I truly did not know which she would choose. Then Cassius, of all people, saved his mother the last humiliation. Not out of nobility, I think, but out of exhaustion, and perhaps out of some late-arriving understanding that the game was wholly over, and that dragging it out would only carve their names deeper into the morning. He reached into his own breast pocket, his, not hers, so it had been him after all, or she had passed it to him in the confusion of the search. And he drew out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief and set it on the very edge of the table, and stepped back from it as though it were hot. Perrin unwrapped it. The star brooch, pale blue enamel and old diamonds, Catalog Piece 3. He held it to his glass, and nodded, and could not speak, and wrote in his ledger with a hand that shook. And the count was 7 of 7, and the trust of the late Queen Isolde was whole again on a trestle table at the gate of the palace, every piece of it recovered in the open, before the eyes of the realm, without a single hand laid on a single person. Now it was over, now truly. I stepped aside from the center of the threshold, and I gave the order I had been holding all morning, the order that was the whole point of the vellum against my chest, and I gave it quietly, because the loud version would have been a cruelty, and cruelty was not in my instructions. "Open the gate," I said. The iron swung. My men drew back the leaves, and beyond them lay the road, and the ordinary world, and the life that Morwenna and Cassius would now go to live outside the walls of the king's house. No one seized them. No one shouted at them. No hand touched them. That in the end was the discipline of it, that a casting out done with perfect authority need not be done with any violence at all. The gate simply opened, and the order of the day was simply that they were now on the outside of it, and the difference between a banishment and a departure came down to this single fact, which everyone present understood. They were walking out with only their own, and everything of the dead queen stayed behind. Morwenna paused in the open gate. She looked back once, not at me, not at the jewels, but at the palace itself, the great gray pile of it against the autumn sky, the house she had married into and hunted through and would never enter again. Whatever she felt, She did not show it, and I found, to my own surprise, that I did not hate her in that moment. I pitied her a little. It is a terrible thing to want beautiful objects more than you have ever managed to want a person, and to arrive at the end of your scheming, and find that the objects were never yours and the persons are all gone, and to have to walk out through a gate held by a man you cannot even remember being kind to. She said nothing, she went. Cassius went after her, not looking back at all already, I have no doubt, composing the version of the morning he would tell in whatever house would still receive them. The gate closed behind them with the particular heavy sound it made, the sound I had heard 10,000 times and never once heard mean what it meant now, and the Queen Consort of Eldermore and her son were on the far side of it, and the morning's work was done. But the morning's work being done is not the same as the story being over, and if I stopped here I would be telling you only the half of it that makes a good picture: the gate, the tears, the diadem in the sun. The other half is what came after, and it is the half that decided whether this was a story about revenge or a story about the law, and the difference between those two things is the whole difference between a mob and a crown. Because here is the thing that would have been easy, and that half the courtyard perhaps expected. There were 7 pieces of priceless jewelry on a trestle table at my gate, recovered from a disgraced woman who had just been cast out, in front of the men who had done the casting out. In a lesser story, the kind the enemies of the watch would have loved to tell, those jewels find their way quietly into the pockets of the guards who recovered them, or into the private keeping of a crown prince who wanted his mother's stones back, and the whole grand morality of the morning collapses into one more transfer of loot from one powerful hand to another. Cast out the thief, keep the treasure. It happens. It has happened in every palace that ever stood. It did not happen here, and the reason it did not is the reason I have spent all these years wanting to tell this story properly, because the recovery of the jewels was only the first half of the discipline. The second half was what the crown did with them, and the crown did the hardest and least glamorous thing of all. It followed the will. I did not carry the jewels back into the palace. I want that understood clearly because it matters. The moment the count reached 7 of 7, I did not touch a single stone. I had Perrin rewrap each piece in its own velvet and its own record. And then, in the open still, before the same witnesses, I summoned the keeper of the household vault and the crown's own solicitor, both of whom the crown prince had had standing ready since dawn, because Rowan had planned this morning to the last careful inch, and he had planned it so that at no point would the jewels pass through the private hands of anyone who wanted them. They went from Perrin's table, under seal in the presence of the solicitor, the keeper, the crown prince, the Princess Adela, and a notary, into a locked strongbox that was carried not to Morwenna's rooms and not to Rowan's but to the trust's own vault, the one place they had always legally belonged, and the strongbox was sealed with 3 seals, and every soul present signed the record. A guard who recovers a treasure and hands it to the man who wanted it has done a favor. A guard who recovers a treasure and puts it back into the law that governs it has done a duty. I have thought about that difference for the rest of my life, and I have never been prouder of anything than of the fact that on that morning, at that gate, the 7 jewels of the late Queen Isolde went not to a friend, and not to a pocket, but back into the cold, impartial keeping of the will she had written to protect them. That was the afternoon of it. What followed took weeks, and it was quieter, and no one filmed it, and it is the part of the story that never gets told, and it is the part that mattered most. The king sent for me 3 days after the gate. I had not seen King Alaric up close in some years. A gatekeeper does not, as a rule, sit with his sovereign, and I was struck, when I was shown into the small, warm room where he received me, by how old he had become, and how much of the old strength was still there under the age, banked but not gone, like a fire seen through a grate. He was thin, and his hands were unsteady, and Morwenna's word for him, old and ill and easily led, was not entirely a lie, which is what had made it so dangerous. But his eyes, when he looked at me, were his own, and there was nothing lead about them. "Sergeant Vale," he said, "you held my gate." "I held it, Your Majesty." "They tell me she threatened your post, in front of everyone. Told you you'd lose your life's work for it." He said it flatly, watching me. "She did, Your Majesty." "And you told her it was a fair trade." A ghost of something crossed the old face, not quite a smile, but its neighbor. "The whole kingdom has seen you say it. Do you know that? The thing she meant as a threat, the phone's caught, and now there is not a man or woman in Eldermore who does not know that the sergeant of my gate was told to open it for a queen, and answered that he'd sooner lose his post than his honor." He shook his head slowly. "She wanted to make you the villain of the morning. Instead, she made you the only man in it anyone trusts. She was never as clever as she believed." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, which is a gatekeeper's oldest skill. "You will not lose your post," the king said. "Put that out of your mind. A man does not lose his post for doing exactly what his king ordered, exactly as his king ordered it, and I have made that known. But that is not why I sent for you." He leaned forward, and the unsteady hands folded together, and for a moment he was not an ill old man, but simply a husband, twice a husband, one wife dead and one wife justly gone, alone at the end of a long reign. "I sent for you because you recovered Isolde's jewels, and I want to tell you myself what I have decided to do with them, because you of all men have earned the right to hear it from me and not from a herald." He told me, and I confess that what he told me was not what I had expected, and that it was better. "When Isolde wrote her will," the king said, "she did a thing that no one at court could talk her out of, and that I loved her for. She would not simply hand the jewels down to Rowan to sit in a vault and be looked at once a decade in a portrait. She had grown up poor, poorer than anyone at this court likes to remember, and she never forgot it. And she wrote into the trust a clause that the household solicitors argued about for a month. She wrote that if the reigning monarch, acting for the good of the whole realm and recording his reasons under seal, judged that the jewels would do more good sold than sitting, then he might sell any or all of them, provided, and here she was very exact, provided that every coin of the proceeds went to the ordinary people of the kingdom, and not one coin to the crown or to any private hand. She trusted no heir, not even her own son, to hold that much wealth and not be changed by it. So she wrote the door into the trust herself, and she wrote it so that the only thing that could ever come out of that door was the good of people who would never wear a diamond in their lives. I remember the fire ticking in the grate while he spoke, and the unsteadiness of his old hands, and the steadiness of his voice, and I remember understanding, slowly, that I was being told the true reason the morning had mattered, not that a thief had been stopped, but that a dead woman's exact and generous intention had been rescued from the people who wanted to swallow it. "Morwenna would have sold them," the king went on, "and now there was iron in it. Make no mistake, Sergeant. If she had got those cases past your gate, the diadem would have been broken up within the year, the stones scattered to buyers in a dozen countries, the money spent on houses and horses and the maintenance of a court in exile, and every penny of it stolen twice over, once from the trust and once from the people the trust was written to serve. That is what you stopped at the gate, not the loss of some pretty stones from a vault, the theft of a poor girl's promise to the poor." He was quiet a moment. Then he told me what he had decided, and he had decided it, I could see, not lightly and not quickly, but with the whole weight of an old king who knows he is near the end and wants to get one last thing exactly right. He would invoke Isolde's clause. He would do the very thing the will permitted and Morwenna had perverted. He would sell the jewels, but he would do it in the light, under seal, for the reasons Isolde had written, and every coin would go where she had said. He had already recorded his reasons and set his seal to them, with the crown prince and the Princess Adela and the solicitor as witnesses. The diadem, the collar, the 2 sapphires, the gray drops, the star brooch, the winter sky ring, all 7 pieces would go to a public sale, conducted openly, catalogued honestly. The provenance of each stone published so that the whole world would know exactly what it was buying and exactly whose promise it was fulfilling. And the money, which everyone knew would be a very great deal of money, because these were not ordinary stones and the story of the morning at the gate had already made them famous, would build and endow, in perpetuity, a chain of houses across the kingdom for the sick and the poor and the children with no one to keep them. The thing Isolde had spent her short life doing by hand, made permanent in stone and coin after her death, out of the very jewels a scheming woman had tried to steal. "They will say I am selling my dead wife's crown," the king said, and there was grief in it but no doubt. "Some will. Let them. A crown that sits in a vault is a lump of gold that once meant something. A crown that becomes 40 years of roofs over sick children's heads is the crown Isolde actually wore, whether it is on a brow or not. She would not thank me for keeping it. She would thank me for spending it exactly, the way she wrote down that it should be spent. And I have spent my whole reign failing to be as good as she was. Let me not fail at this last. I have kept many secrets in my years at the gate, and I will keep most of them to my grave, but this one I am glad to be free to tell, because it is the answer to the question the whole kingdom asked when the sale was announced, the question that the enemies of the crown tried to make into a scandal. Why would a king sell his beloved first wife's priceless jewels? Was it greed? Was it spite against the woman he had cast out? Was it the crown, or the crown prince, or the guards, lining their pockets under cover of the law? I stood in that warm, small room and heard the true answer from the old man's own mouth, and the true answer was the least scandalous and most honorable one there is. He sold them because she told him to, and because the money was never going to be his, and because a promise made by a poor girl who became a queen was worth more than the most beautiful diadem ever cut, and he meant to keep it. I said the only thing there was to say. I said, "Your Majesty, I only held the gate." And the old king looked at me with Isolde's own kind of plainness, and he said, "Sergeant, if you had opened it, none of this would have been possible. The finest intention in a will is only ink until someone stands in a gate and refuses to let it be stolen. You did not only hold a gate, you held her promise. I will not forget it, and neither, I think, will the kingdom." The sale was held 6 weeks later, and I was there in plain clothes at the back, because the crown prince himself had sent word that I was to be, and because I could not have stayed away. It was not held quietly. Rowan had learned, I think, the same lesson I had learned at the gate, that the light is the friend of an honest deed and the enemy of a lie, and so he had made the sale as public as a coronation. The catalogue was printed and sent to every corner of the kingdom and beyond, and on the front of it, before a single stone was listed, was printed Isolde's clause in full, in her own words, so that every buyer and every reader knew before they saw a single diamond that these jewels were being sold on the written instruction of the queen who had owned them, that not one coin would touch the crown, and that every coin would go to the sick and the poor and the children with no one. Rowan had understood that the story of the morning at the gate, which had by then been seen by more people than lived in the kingdom, the diadem in the sun, the ring held up between an old woman's fingers, the sergeant who would sooner lose his post than his honor, had made these 7 pieces the most famous jewels alive, and he had turned that fame, deliberately and shrewdly, into the engine of his mother's promise. People did not come to the sale to buy pretty stones. They came to buy a piece of the morning at the gate, and to put their money where the whole kingdom had watched the law stand up, and they paid for that sums that no jeweler's valuation would ever have reached. I watched the diadem sold. I will not pretend I did not feel something when it went. It had been on the head of a woman the whole realm had loved, and there is a grief in seeing such a thing pass into a stranger's hands. But then the auctioneer read out before the bidding that the proceeds of this single piece would build and keep, for as long as the kingdom stood, a house in the northern hills for children left with no one, a house that would, by the crown prince's own request, bear the late queen's name, and I understood that the diadem was not being lost. It was being turned into exactly the thing Isolde had spent her life turning her own hands and hours into, made permanent, made stone, made a roof. And when the hammer fell, the room did not applaud the price. It stood, all of it, and was silent, the way a courtyard had once been silent at a gate, and I have never in my life seen money change hands and felt that something holy had happened, but I felt it then. The 7 pieces raised a sum I will not write down here, because the number is not the point, and because it has been recorded honestly in the Trust's own book where anyone may read it. It was enough. It was more than enough. It built the first houses within a year, and endowed them past my own lifetime and past, I expect, the lifetimes of anyone reading this, and the last I heard there were children sleeping warm and safe under those roofs who had never heard of a diadem or a gate or a sergeant, and who did not need to, because the whole point of the morning had been that they would never have to. That is the truest measure of the thing. The wrong was so completely put right that the people it was put right for will never know a wrong was ever done. Isolde would have wanted it exactly so. She never did like to be thanked. Morwenna and Cassius tried, of course, to make the sale into the scandal they had failed to make of the morning. From wherever they had gone, some house of some cousin who would still have them, growing colder to them, I heard, by the season, they let it be known that the king had been coerced, that the crown prince had engineered his own mother's ruin to plunder his stepmother's jewels, that the whole tale of the trust and the clause was an invention to dress a robbery in the clothes of charity. For a few weeks the story had legs, because it always does, because there is a part of every crowd that would rather believe the powerful are all equally corrupt than believe that once, in one gate on one morning, the law simply held. But Rowan had built for that too. Every reason was recorded under seal. Every coin was published. The will was printed on the catalogue. The sale had been held in the open before the world. And standing behind all of it, unshakable, was a video that half the kingdom had watched. A queen weeping robbery at a gate while an old woman held up a dead friend's ring and told a crowd to believe their eyes. The lie could not get past the record. It never can, when the record is made honestly and made in public, which is the whole reason honest men make records and hold their doings in the open, and the whole reason liars hate the light. The story died. And the 2 who had spread it faded slowly out of the kingdom's attention and then out of its memory, which is, I have come to think, the only real punishment such people fear, not prison, not poverty, but to become at last unimportant. There is one more thing about the jewels, and then I will tell you the end. Of the 7 pieces, 6 were sold. The 7th was not. The Winter Sky sapphire ring catalogue piece 4, the one Perrin had found first in the suede roll, the one the Princess Adela had held up between 2 fingers and said I remember on Isolde's hand. She wore it to my wedding. The king did not put that one to the sale. He had the right. The clause let him sell any or all, and it let him withhold any too. And he withheld the ring. When Adela asked him why, in my hearing, for I was there the day the pieces went to the sale house, and the ring did not, the old king said a thing I have carried ever since. Because a promise to the poor is Isolde's, he said, and I will keep every coin of it. But that ring was on her hand when she was kind to my sister at a frightened girl's wedding, and there are some things that are not for the realm and not for a sale and not even for the poor. They are only for love, and love is not a thing you are permitted to spend. Adela loved her. Adela shall have the ring. Isolde would box my ears for keeping back even one, but she would understand this one. She always understood the difference between what belongs to everyone and what belongs to no one but the heart. And so the Princess Adela wears the Winter Sky sapphire to this day, the only one of the 7 that was never sold, and every child in every one of Isolde's houses is warm because of the other 6, and both of those things are true at once, and I have never found any contradiction in them, and I have stopped looking for one. I have told this story now to a good many people over a good many years, and there is one question that always comes, and it is a fair one, and I have never given a fully honest answer to it until now. The question is this: if I knew for 6 years that the jewels were leaving, if I stood at the gate and watched Cassius's driver load a flat case into a car at dawn and logged it in my book, then why did I not stop it sooner? Why did I let a queen's treasure walk out of my gate a piece at a time for 6 years and do nothing but write it down? I used to answer with the discipline of it, that a guard has no lawful power he has not been given, that a man who stops what he has not been ordered to stop has appointed himself king, and all of that is true, and I still believe it. But it is not the whole truth, and the whole truth is harder, and I think I owe it to you now. The whole truth is that the waiting nearly broke me, and that I am not sure, some nights, that I was right. There was a dawn, I think it was the 3rd or 4th year, when I logged a flat case out of the gate at 4:30 in the morning, in the dark and the cold, Cassius's driver not even bothering to lie about the hour anymore, and I stood there afterward with my pen in my hand, and I hated the book. I hated the discipline. I thought, what is the use of a gatekeeper who sees a robbery and writes it down and does nothing? What is honor, if honor is only a man standing very straight while a thing he knows is wrong walks past him into the dark? I very nearly threw down the pen that morning. I very nearly went after the car. And if I had seized that one case on my own authority, with no order, on nothing but my own certainty, I would have been in the right about the case and dead wrong about everything else, because I would have become exactly the thing the enemies of the watch always accuse us of being: a man who decides for himself, by force, at a gate, who the law is and what it wants. Morwenna would have had her grievance then, real and true. A guard laid hands on my son's private property in the dark on his own say-so, and she would have used it, and she was clever enough that she might have used it to keep every jewel and break every man who stood against her. So I kept the book. I stood very straight while the wrong walked past me into the dark, and I wrote it down, and I hated it, and I did it anyway, because the discipline to not act on a wrong you have no lawful power to right is heavier than any action, and because I had come to understand slowly, over those hard cold dawns, that the book I hated was not nothing. It was the case. Every dawn I logged was a stone in the wall the Crown Prince was building, and the wall would not have held with one stone missing. When Rowan finally moved, he moved on years of my hated little entries, the dates, the hours, the cases, the driver's name. And it was those entries, as much as anything, that made the order at the gate lawful and unbreakable instead of a rash morning spite. The waiting that nearly broke me was the very thing that made the casting out hold. I could not see that in the 4th year, standing in the dark hating my pen. I can see it now. I tell you this because I do not want you to think me a hero who always knew. I was not. I was a man who very nearly did the right thing at the wrong time in the wrong way, and who was saved from it. I say this plainly, by discipline he did not always believe in, and a patience he did not always have. If there is any lesson in me at all, it is that one, that there is a courage in acting, which the world sees and praises, and there is a rarer courage in not acting, in holding, in writing it down and waiting for the lawful hour, and the second kind is harder and lonelier and no one ever films it, and it is the kind the gate actually runs on. The lawful hour came. That is the whole of what I did, in the end. I held the book through 6 years of dawns until the king's own seal came across the West Court in a boy's shaking hand, and then, in the 1 hour I was finally given leave, I held the gate. Anyone can hold a gate for an hour when the king has ordered it and the whole court is watching. The gate is held, truly held in the 6 years before that hour, alone in the dark, when no one has ordered anything and no one is watching and the wrong is walking past you into the cold, and you write it down and let it go and trust, against every instinct in your body, that the lawful hour will come. It came. It does more often than the impatient believe. The trick is to still be standing at your post, with your honor intact and your book honest, on the morning it does. King Alaric did not live many more years. He died quietly, in the small warm room where he had told me about his dead wife's promise, with the crown prince at his side, and the kingdom mourned him more kindly than it might have, because the last great act of his reign had been an honest one, and people remember the last thing best. Rowan is king now, and a good one, careful, slow to anger, slower to speak, exactly as he was in the courtyard, and the kingdom is safer for it. He kept his word about the houses. He kept his word about all of it. Isolde's name is over a dozen doors now in a dozen towns, and I have stood outside 2 of them, in plain clothes at the back, the way I stood at the sale, and watched children go in out of the rain who will grow up not knowing that a queen's jewels bought their roof. And it is, I promise you, the finest thing I have ever seen my old gate be the beginning of. Princess Adela is old now, older even than she was, if such a thing is possible, and still afraid of nothing, and still wearing the winter sky sapphire. And when I saw her last, at a small ceremony which I will come to, she raised her hand so the ring caught the light and said to me, dry as ever, "It knows it was rescued, Sergeant. I like to think it remembers the gate. I do not know if a ring can remember. But I remember it, held up between her fingers in the cold, more clearly than almost anything else in my life, and perhaps that is the same thing. As for me, I did not lose my post. The king saw to that in his lifetime, and Rowan saw to it after, and I stood the Gatehouse Watch at Harrogate for 4 more years before my knees told me, plainly and without appeal, that the cold of the gate had won and it was time. I retired the way a gatekeeper should at the gate at the change of the watch, handing my book, the last of a great many books, to the man who relieved me, Corporal Hale, who had stood at my right hand on the morning of the casting out and had said, when the day was still only an order and a dread, the gate holds, Sergeant. He is Sergeant now. The gate holds still. It will hold after him, and after the man who relieves him, because the gate is not any one man. The gate is the thing all of us agreed to be, on our best mornings. When the powerful came to it certain, it would open and found, instead, a wall. The ceremony I mentioned was a small one, and I nearly did not go, because I have never cared for ceremonies about myself. But Rowan asked, and you do not refuse the king, and so I went. It was held at one of Isolde's houses, the first one in the northern hills, on a bright cold morning very like the morning at the gate, and there were children there, warm and fed and loud, and there was the Princess Adela with the sapphire on her hand, and there was the king, and there was a small brass plate that the king unveiled and asked me to read aloud, though I think he knew I could barely get through it. It did not have my name on it. I had asked through Hale that it not, and Rowan had honored the request, and I was grateful. It had instead a single line which the king told me he had chosen himself, from among the things I was supposed not to know he knew I had said at the gate. It read, "The gate is held in the 6 years no one is watching." I read it aloud to a room full of children who did not understand it and did not need to, and I got most of the way through before my voice went, and the Princess Adela, without any fuss, finished the last 2 words for me in her dry stone voice, and no one thought the less of me for it. And then the children went back to being loud, which is the whole point of a house full of children and the truest possible sound to hear over a plate about honor. And I stood at the back in my plain clothes and thought about a folded sheet of vellum against my chest on a cold, clear morning, and about 7 stones in the sun, and about a promise a poor girl who became a queen had written down and trusted, against all sense, to a chain of ordinary people that ran from her dead hand through a careful clerk and a stubborn old princess, and a crown prince building a wall stone by stone, and a king finding his honor at the end, and somewhere in the middle of that chain, a gatekeeper who very nearly threw down his pen and did not. That is the whole story. They cast out the Queen Consort and her son, and it was lawful, and it was done in the open, and no hand was laid on anyone. They recovered the late queen's priceless jewels at the gate, in the sun, before the eyes of the realm, and not one stone went into a private pocket. And then the crown sold them honestly, under seal, for the reasons the dead queen had written down herself, and turned a diadem into 40 years of roofs over children who will never know a diadem existed. The thief walked out with only her own. The promise was kept, the gate held. I was only the man who held it. But I have come to believe in my old age that the man who holds the gate is not a small thing after all, that the whole grand machinery of a crown, the wills and the trusts and the seals and the king's own honor, all of it in the end, comes down to whether one ordinary man in a red coat, on the morning the powerful come certain the iron will move for them, decides to be a wall. I decided to be a wall. It was the best decision of my life. And if there is a gate anywhere still, and a man standing at it in the cold on a morning no one is watching, writing down a wrong he has no power yet to right and trusting the lawful hour to come, then I say to him, across all the years between us, hold, just hold. The hour comes, be standing when it does.